So Cam and I are out here freezing in Tromsø, Norway, looking at the brand new LUMIX S1R Mark II. And guys, on paper, this camera is kind of crazy. We've been testing it out as much as we can while we're out here. We're really only out here for a day and a half, so we don't have too much time. But so far on paper, I feel like this is really actually finally competing with Sony and Canon cameras. So let's go ahead and talk about what exactly makes this camera stand out and why it's interesting to me. And to be upfront with you guys, LUMIX did fly me out here to check out this camera. However, they're not sponsoring this video and they don't have any say on what I say in this video. That being said, this video is sponsored by DaVinci Resolve. We'll talk about them later. Guys, the S1 Mark II kind of just has it all. A super creamy high megapixel sensor, some of the best in-body stabilization out there, face detect, autofocus, native anamorphic support, 8K video, uncropped slow motion, and the list just goes on and on. I'm genuinely stoked on this camera, and a lot of that magic is gonna come down to this new sensor, this 44 megapixel sensor. There's some real magic going on here that you'll just have to see to believe. Although it's definitely not all sunshine and rainbows, there are some things that I have noticed about this camera that we'll also touch on. But before we get too far into all that stuff, let's go ahead and talk about the body design of the S1 Mark II, because there's some really good upgrades to this camera. This camera has it, the thing we all want, or at least the thing that I want and all my friends want. We have the flip screen. I know a lot of you guys get mad about the flip screen, but it's not just a flip screen, it's also a tilt screen. And honestly, it is fantastic. It is super durable feeling, which that's always the biggest question mark when it comes to these screens. Is it actually going to hold up to abuse as you continue using it? But from what I can tell, all of the hinges feel very, very robust and fluid, and I don't think durability is going to be an issue when it comes to this tilt screen. The S1R Mark II is completely weather sealed, and it's also newly freeze resistant. If you are taking the S1R into extreme environments, it's a tank and it's gonna hold up just fine. But this is probably one of the best things they added to this camera, and that's going to be that the sensor is covered when it's turned off. So let me just do the cardinal sin here and turn it on. So now you can see the sensor is exposed. Then I turn it off, boom, sensor cover protects the sensor. This is going to keep dust and rain off of your sensor, unless you're like me and you open up in the middle of snow just to get some crispy B-roll shots of the sensor for you guys. Definitely don't do that. We do this for YouTube, for your enjoyment, but you could ruin your sensor. So yeah, sensor cover, that's great. And other things to note about this camera is that we do get a newly added lock switch here on the back, which is completely customizable. You can go into the menus and tell it what you want it to lock. So if you're accidentally hitting your white balance button, or you're accidentally messing with your ISO or your shutter accidentally, you can just toggle that on. Other things are this front record button. There's a little record button here on the front, which is pretty great, especially when you start to have this camera rigged out. A lot of times cages on the top can make it hard to press the record button. So that's gonna be a nice addition. And then lastly, we do have a focus switch. So you can toggle between single, continuous, and manual focus right here on the camera without having to dive into the menus. Speaking of extreme weather, it's actually literally hailing right now. Now in terms of overall aesthetics, I would say that it is good. It's nothing amazing, but as far as cameras go, it's really, really nice. Also, something I didn't mention is that there is a fan on here. So if you're working in extreme heat, the camera's actually going to be able to cool itself off. This camera looks nothing like the Nikon ZF, which is an absolutely stunning camera. It actually is pretty much exactly the same as my S5 IIX. It's slightly bigger than that camera. I wouldn't say it's anything to write home about, but looks fine. Now with these LUMIX cameras, one of the best things about them is just how customizable it is. So right here, there is a little front button, and I actually have programmed that to pull up false color. So now we have false color in the S1R Mark II. LUMIX just keeps giving us all these little technical features that we've been begging for on other systems, and LUMIX is like, yeah, here, take it. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this comes into the S9 and the S5 IIX and future updates. I don't actually know that. That's just kind of in a little bit of an intuition I have. And it's really easy to program these buttons. All you gotta do is hold down any button, and then it's gonna ask you, oh, what do you want this button to do? And I was like, oh, I want it to do false color. Boom. Now it does that. And you can do that with all of the programmable buttons. I love this camera. Everyone else needs to learn from LUMIX. It's just, they do it better. Okay, so this hail is actually really coming down now. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about something that the S1R Mark II isn't doing so well, at least it's not doing it well right now. That's going to be its autofocus. For me, it's been hit or miss, which is honestly very surprising because I've had great experiences with my LUMIX S9 for autofocus. When I was doing different tests, the tracking box was tracking the subject, so the tracking itself seems fine, but the actual focus felt hesitant. When I was doing these tests with Zach, as you can see on the screen right now, again, it just seemed very unconfident with itself, or it would take forever to actually jump from the background to Zach, or sometimes when Zach would leave frame, it wouldn't even focus on the background, which is definitely a bit odd and a bit disappointing coming from LUMIX as they've switched to phase detect autofocus. Now here's the thing. We're using sample cameras. This says sample here on the bottom. This is a beta unit, and LUMIX does support their cameras. Go figure, what a concept. So I am wondering if a lot of these autofocus issues are going to be patched out even before you all receive them once the camera actually launches, or maybe they'll fix it in the next couple of months. And on that note of actually updating and supporting their cameras, LUMIX did push out an update for the S1R Mark II autofocus, and it does seem way more reliable. Cam and I went out to the desert to test it out, and as you can see in this footage, it actually seems pretty dang sticky, and it's following me around very consistently. So from everything that I tested, it does seem to work quite well now, and I imagine they might even do some more tweaks in future updates. LUMIX has had the best-in-class stabilization for a while now. I'm not making that up, right, Cam?
Are you filming right now?
Yeah.
What'd you say?
I said LUMIX has had the best-in-class stabilization for a while now. Is that right?
Yeah, but I never really got it. Like, everybody always raved about it, and I never really took it serious until this camera. Because once I saw it, I was like, oh.
Yeah, they've added a few new tricks with this camera. The first one, obviously, this is in other cameras, but they do have anamorphic stabilization support. So that means if you're using a 1.5x anamorphic or a 2x anamorphic, you're able to change I guess it's changing the algorithm. I'm not really sure what it's doing, but it's calibrating for the different anamorphic lenses you're using. But really the cool new feature is cropless electronic stabilization. From my understanding of what they told me, the actual sensor is bigger than the effective area of the sensor. They're using that extra area to provide more stabilization data so that they don't have to actually crop in on the image to provide extra stabilization. So that's normally how it works. It'll crop in on the sensor, use the extra data to provide electronic stabilization. But now with this new feature, you don't have to do that. And to my eye, it looks really good. I almost had it on for a majority of everything that I was filming. And to me, it doesn't look like that classic jello-y electronic stabilization that normally kind of ruins shots. I wouldn't use it in a super shaky situation, but for handheld shots, I think it works pretty dang good.
It doesn't work with anamorphic lenses, though.
That's true. Yeah, the cropless electronic stabilization doesn't work with anamorphic. That's not too big a deal.
I believe in anamorphic mode, it turns the roll axis off, possibly. I don't know what it is they're doing, but it works amazing. When you do like reveal shots, like tilts and pans, looks great. And then for walking stuff, you have the electronic stabilization in the non-crop mode too. Oh, wait, hang on.
Hanging on, my camera's gonna die. I can only wait as long as the camera records. Waiting. Oh.
Guys, look at this LUMIX bag we got in Norway.
Yeah.
But I did tell Connor I'd pay him if he gave me a shout out. So this is from LUMIX.
I didn't want this to be recorded.
Isn't my own money, but
okay.
This is bucks.
Oh.
There's more, but I gotta pay a couple more people off.
Okay. Is this for shouting out your strap or? Yeah. Okay, that's good, thanks.
And my hat.
And your hat, yeah.
And,
hey guys, it pays to shill. And on the note of really good stabilization, we were attempting to capture the northern lights. We kind of saw them. Unfortunately, they weren't in full swing because we had a lot of cloud coverage, but I was messing around with hand-holding long exposure shots because I didn't bring a tripod. Pretty smart when you're capturing low light stuff to not bring a tripod. To my surprise, it actually held up pretty good. So I was hand-holding shots a little over a second long, sometimes up to 3 seconds long. And if you zoom in on the photo, they look decently sharp. Now I did take another photo where I set it down on a rock and took a picture, and you can tell that it is definitely sharper. But when you crank on all the stabilization modes, you can kind of get away with some pretty long exposure shots. Okay guys, so this is where the magic happens when it comes to this camera. The S1R Mark II has a 44 megapixel 8K sensor that is truly impressive. Now, I personally don't really care for 8K. I've said that for a while. However, because it is an 8K sensor, we are getting a downsampled 6.4K open gate, which is really, really crispy. I think some of this open gate footage, especially when shooting in anamorphic, looks incredible. However, unfortunately, we're still shooting in 420 when we use 6K open gate. Kind of a bummer. However, I did do side-by-side tests with the 6K open gate 420, the 4K 422 10-bit, and as well ProRes internal. And to me, when you look at them side by side, once you color grade them, they look pretty much comparable. A lot of that extra information is going to help you more on the editing side, so when you're actually pushing and pulling the colors, but the 420 in this camera still looks good. And yes, you did hear me right, it does shoot ProRes RAW internal in the S1R Mark II, and it's able to record RAW internal thanks to the fact that we now have CF Express B cards in this camera. The footage that you're able to get off of this sensor is pretty incredible, and there's one more magic secret about that I'm about to tell you in just a second. That's where I put the ad. Watch the ad. Okay guys, so I'm back here from Norway and I'm processing all of the footage, and we have a lot of 8K files and ProRes files, so it's pretty heavy stuff. And normally this would be a huge headache to send to my editor who's based in Germany. His name's Malachi, he's really cool. And that's because I would send everything through Dropbox, which if you guys have ever used Dropbox before, you know it's a huge pain. It takes hours to upload, and then it takes even more time for him to download on his end, especially if you don't have super fast internet. But now with DaVinci Cloud, the whole process is so much simpler. All I have to do is create a cloud-based project, go ahead and upload my footage, and DaVinci Resolve automatically starts generating proxy files, and Malachi has access to the footage within minutes, making it so much faster. But honestly, one of the things that I find the most useful is that Malachi and I are working in the same timeline. So no longer do I have to wait for him to edit a file and then export it and send it to me. Now I can just jump into the cloud-based project and I can work in the same timeline as him, roughly in real time. It's pretty amazing. I really do find if you're working with a remote editor or having multiple people collaborate on a project of any kind, I really do recommend DaVinci Resolve Cloud projects. It's really just made my whole process so much easier, and again, saves me that headache of having to download and upload things over and over again. If you would like to learn more about how to implement DaVinci Resolve Cloud into your editing process, definitely click the link in the description so that you guys can learn more and start saving yourself a ton of time editing. What do you think? You wanna come up here? Guys, it gets even more interesting when it comes to this sensor right here, and that's because our base ISOs are wildly different, and there's a reason for that. When you are shooting in the standard dynamic range mode, your base low ISO is 200, and then your high ISO is 1000. And then when you toggle it into the dynamic range extension mode, which I'll cover more on that in just a second, your base ISO now is 400 and 2000. Why did they do this? Why is the base ISO for Vlog, by the way, so low? Well, it comes down to this sensor, and basically what it's allowing us to do is get much more, how do I say this, color fidelity or richness of color in the shadows and the highlights of the image. And I will say it's extremely noticeable. While we were in Norway, we were sharing around screenshots of our video as we were testing with the color grading. And we were also taking pictures, and I sent a few to Cam, and he was like, "Are these photos that you sent me?" I was like, "No, they're actually screen grabs." So we're getting kind of close to that picture color fidelity, but in Vlog. And honestly, I was often shooting in that 6.4K 420 codec. So it's really interesting that even when you're shooting in the 420, just how good and rich the colors look coming off of the sensor. And I think that's gonna be one of the things about this camera. You really, really need to play with this footage for yourself to see what we're talking about. Because once we apply a color grade, it all kind of feels mostly the same to anything else, although I still think it looks significantly better. So I am actually planning on uploading another video where I just provide you guys with sample files to the S1R Mark II. And I'll do it in a couple of different modes. I'll do the 6K open gate, I'll do it in anamorphic, I'll also do 422 10-bit in 4K, maybe Cinema 4K, and then I'll also be supplying 8K files and then also ProRes files so that you guys have everything at your disposal. So definitely subscribe and keep an eye out for that video. It may actually be up right now. So really quick, I do want to touch on photography. This isn't a photography-centric video, but The S1R Mark II is a stellar photography camera. Something that they've added in is up to a 40 frames per second burst mode when you're shooting in the electronic shutter mode. It's honestly pretty dang impressive. Now, if you do switch it over into the mechanical shutter mode, you're limited to a more humble 10 frames a second. Because it is a 44 megapixel sensor, they've added in this high resolution photo mode, which I should have tested for you guys when I was in Norway, but I kind of forgot. But you get up to 177 megapixel photos. That is honestly kind of ridiculous. I don't know which situation I would be in that I would need it unless I'm doing super large prints, but it is pretty cool that you're able to do that as well. And this 44 megapixel sensor is kind of the sweet spot. In my personal opinion, I love cameras in that 32, 45, 50 megapixel range. And this is kind of on the high middle part of that range. I just think that they give you the most quality without slowing you down too much. As you get above 50 megapixels, there's just so much more processing that has to go into the camera that it does seem to kind of slow you down, although the images do look fantastic. With the S1R Mark II, we've bumped it up from the S5 IIX and we're getting a 5.7 million dot electronic viewfinder. It looks really good. I think that this is kind of the perfect resolution, especially when you consider the cost of this camera. And one other thing I should note about photography is that you do get the custom LUT support for the photo mode from the LUMIX Lab app. So that's carrying over from the LUMIX S9, which I really enjoyed shooting with that, into the S5 IIX and now the S1R Mark II. And when I was running around Norway shooting photos on the S1R Mark II, I will say that it worked really well. In fact, the autofocus seemed actually reliable compared to when I was shooting video, so that's kind of interesting. Again, I think they'll fix that in a firmware update. If enough of you guys want it, definitely let me know in the comment section down below and I'll maybe make a follow-up photography video for the S1R Mark II. After using this camera and being back in California, going through the footage, using it even more, I can honestly say that it's quickly becoming one of my favorite cameras over anything that Canon and Sony is making.
Are you shilling?
Oh yeah, we're all shilling all the time.
Are you filming?
No, I'm not filming. Now, I will have to continue doing tests as this was kind of just a first hands-on experience, but I can't really think of a single Canon or Sony camera that I would rather have over this. And to me, the reason why this has happened is because Lumix actually listens. So they're giving us all these features that we've been begging for years. We have open gate, we have false color, we have waveforms, we have shutter angle, we now have a high megapixel camera. And the things that are wrong with it, like the autofocus, I feel like they're just gonna patch out with a firmware update because they really do support their cameras. I feel like my S9 and my S5 IIX gets an update every couple months that adds legitimate new features, not just like, oh, the battery lasts 0.5% longer than it used to. It's like, oh, now it doesn't have any overheating limits, or oh, now the S5 IIX actually has good autofocus and it has the LUT support for photos. And I don't imagine the S1R Mark II is going to be any different. I think that Lumix is going to support the camera moving forward. And when you compare the features that this camera gives you for the price to other competitive camera systems like Sony, with the A7R5 that's pushing $4,000, or other cameras that are even more expensive, but they don't give you all these really great features that we've discussed in this video. To me, if Sony and Canon aren't careful, I think Lumix is about to take over. It's the LUMIX Revolution. I plan on making more content, so subscribe so you don't miss out on that. There'll be a link to a playlist with all the creators that went to Norway. Definitely give them some love as well. I hope that you all enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.